welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Steve Marks. I'm on CMC's Board of Trustees and President of Hannah News Service here in Columbus. It's great to see everyone here today. Today is CMC's and Bill LaFayette's annual Blue Chip Economic Forecast. Our forum is sponsored by BDO, Fifth Third Bank, the Dispatch Media Group, and Excel. Each of our sponsors are represented by many friends and associates. Won't you please help me thank them and welcome Stephanie Green, Managing Director of Fifth Third Private Bank, to the stage to introduce our forum speakers. Stephanie?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Columbus Metropolitan Club. I also need to thank Andy Campbell for not including another bad economist joke in the script today, so thank you, Andy. Fifth Third Bank is proud to support the Columbus Metropolitan Club as we convene weekly town hall meetings on important community topics. We are better as a community when many come together to break bread and discuss the matters of our times. And so, here we sit at the dawn of a new decade with record stock market peaks and in a city that is experiencing tremendous growth. However good things may appear, it's always wise to be cautious. And predicting the future is tricky business, but listening to experts for insight, good data, and guidance will aid us as we look ahead. So please join me in welcoming our speakers today. First, we have a senior economist with the Huntington National Bank, Mr. George Mokrzan. Our host, journalist at the Columbus Dispatch, Mr. Mark Williams. And founder of Regionomics, Mr. Bill LaFayette. Bill will start us off with his 2020 forecast, then Mark will lead the conversation. Bill, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year, everybody, and thank you all for coming. And my thanks, of course, to my friends at CMC for having me back. This is my 19th year up here. Thank you. And in honor of that occasion, I'm really happy to welcome back an old friend, George Mokrzan, who is Director of Economics for Huntington Bank. George collaborated on this forecast when I was at the Columbus Chamber. Also back as our moderator is Mark Williams of the Dispatch. This is Mark's 9th year on the stage with me. There's also a little present for those of you in the audience today. It's a flashlight. I'm obviously hoping to shed light on the 2020 economy. One little bit of guidance, you have to pull out the white tab at the bottom to make it work. In any event, though, last year made history. This past July, the expansion reached its 121st month, which made it the longest, probably, in U.S. history. And it was very, very good to Central Ohio. Employment started growing here at the beginning of 2010. Since then, the 10-county metropolitan statistical area has added around 203,000 net new jobs, growth of more than 22%. Meanwhile, the U.S. is up 17% over that period, and Ohio's up less than 12%. Central Ohio's employment continues to grow, but at a slower pace. Our employment gain each year between 2011 and 2017 was 2% or better. In 2018, we slowed to 1.3% and failed to exceed U.S. growth for the first time since 2007, before the recession. As it looks now, growth last year was 1.2%, again less than the national average. However, 1.2% was exactly what I forecast standing here last year. The 2020 forecast is my 21st. I'm predicting that this will be our 11th consecutive year of growth. Again, though, we should underperform the national average, but not to the same degree as we did last year. My forecast expects a gain of around 1%, something like 11,000 net new jobs. The Philadelphia Federal Reserve's quarterly survey of professional forecasters, meanwhile, predicts U.S. employment growth of 1.2%, coupled with slower growth in gross domestic product. Economists see relatively little chance of a recession breaking out in 2020, only a 26% chance of that happening in the next 12 months, according to the latest Wall Street Journal survey of economists. My forecast assumes no recession this year. My forecast also assumes that the problems in Iraq and Iran are going to blow over, which is what people are seeming to suggest. If either of those two things happens, obviously all bets are off. I argued last year that the fundamental problem that's slowing our employment growth is workforce availability. One point that I made last year was that if basic economic problems were causing the slowdown in job growth, we would see a slowdown in job postings in Central Ohio. But a slowdown in job postings wasn't happening then and isn't happening now. In fact, job postings as a share of total employment, although they're down from earlier in the expansion, they've increased substantially over the last year. What's more, job postings in many of the occupational groups that are important in the sectors where growth has been the weakest, hospitality, corporate management, and administration and support, are doing particularly well. To add another layer of difficulty to the workforce picture, projections by the state suggest that we're going to have at least another decade of very slow growth of the working age population. If the slowdown in immigration continues, even those projections could turn out to be too high. And this leads me into a few thoughts on the longer-term workforce challenge. As it turns out, I'm co-author of a new book called Knowledge Economies and Knowledge Work. It's currently available as an ebook, but it's going to be out in hard copy very soon. My collaborators are Denise Bedford, who's on the faculty at Georgetown, Seema Iyer, who's director of the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance at the University of Baltimore, and Wayne Curtis, who's a DC area researcher studying social entrepreneurship and wealth building strategies for the working class. Over the past 70 years, the economy has transformed from one based on industrial production to one based on knowledge production. This transformation is being accelerated by automation and artificial intelligence. Our key argument in the book is that the knowledge economy applies everywhere, not just to high skill and technical fields. The knowledge economy shapes and is shaped by places and local economies. Many people think that artificial intelligence especially is going to result in a wholesale loss of jobs that we're going to need to remedy through measures like universal basic income. But we cite two recent studies, one by McKinsey and one by the World Economic Forum, that argue that these trends are more likely to result in a net job gain than a massive loss. This is not to say, though, that there's not going to be dislocation and pain. The majority of jobs are going to change fundamentally over the next 10 years and are going to require a whole new set of skills. The World Economic Forum report predicts that 75 million jobs worldwide may be displaced, while 133 million jobs may be created. However, just because jobs can be automated doesn't mean that they will be. It depends, as it always does, on the cost and effectiveness of machines versus the cost and effectiveness of people. The point is that you're more likely than not to keep your job. However, it's very likely to be quite different than it has been. And regions are going to win or lose just as they did as manufacturing transformed the economy in the late 20th century. Education is absolutely crucial. It cannot be simply preparation for a career anymore. It has to support the ongoing learning that all individuals are going to need to remain relevant and solve real-world problems. And we can't lay this responsibility solely at the feet of educational institutions. A substantial share of the burden to retrain and reskill is going to fall on business, either directly or indirectly. It's going to become a matter of competitiveness and survival. We have to continue to develop close day-to-day working relationships among firms, educational institutions, economic developers, and the workforce development community. Our continued success as a region here in Columbus depends on our ability to understand how the knowledge economy shifts and will impact our driver industries, what new occupations and skills are going to be needed, and how we help workers to acquire those skills. But we are very smart people, and we work well together. We can do this. In any case, thanks again for coming and for listening, and I wish you all the success and health and happiness in the year and decade ahead. Mark, it is now your turn.
Happy New Year, everybody. It's good to see you all here. I am amazed that 400 people show up to have a conversation about the economy. It's really, it's just really amazing to me. And thanks to the CMC and Bill for having me back to moderate again this discussion. And I'm really happy that George is joining us this year. Huntington has so many offices throughout the Midwest that it really gives George an insight that a lot of us don't have on how our neighbors' economies are performing, not just ours. And he will be an important part of our conversation today. Before I go on, I wanted to take a quick moment to remember a colleague who unexpectedly passed away last year. Many of you know Jim Siegel, either from his work at the State House as one of the finest State House reporters that I ever knew, or from his regular appearances here at CMC talking about legislative issues. Jim and his work were so highly respected that his memorial service was held at the State House atrium, an honor that's usually reserved for senators and governors. I love talking to Jim. We parked our cars in the same garage, so it was not uncommon for us to end up walking to or from the office. And where I usually unloaded on Jim about something the legislature was doing that I thought was particularly boneheaded. And then last year, before he passed, Jim and I spent a lot more time together writing about House Bill 6, the really controversial piece of legislation that bails out our two nuclear power plants in Ohio. I don't know what I would have done without his help. That's the kind of person that Jim was. And even after his death, and I was still writing stories about House Bill 6, I found myself thinking about Jim and phrasing of some of the story and thinking, would that be how Jim would look at this as well? So he was continuing to help me even after he was gone. A true pro in every sense of the word, an even better human being, and I will always miss him. So with that, let's get started. As Bill noted, our Economic expansion is now a record 10 years old. As also Bill noted, I haven't seen any forecasts that suggest a recession is on the horizon. Unemployment rate nationally of 3.5% is at a 50-year low. Job creation is slowing, but still growing. We had an ADP report that came out today, 200,000 private sector jobs created in the month of December. Consumer confidence and spending remain strong. Stock market is at an all-time high, even with what's been going on in the Middle East. And the Federal Reserve, rightly or wrongly, stands ready to give the economy a jolt if there's any sign of it starting to falter. But my spidey senses are getting a little on edge. That something isn't quite right, especially here in Ohio. Our job growth has pretty much stalled in the state. We may have even lost some jobs last year. We'll know in a few months whether that's true. Unemployment claims still low, but starting to rise. We've lost manufacturing jobs over the past year, and the various manufacturing indices show a slowdown, if not an outright recession. Finally, it seems it's the consumer that's really propping up our economy, and that business investment continues to be weak even after the president's tax cut. So, George, am I being too negative, or is the glass half full or half empty?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mark, and Happy New Year to all of you. The economy in Ohio actually had a reasonably good year overall, despite the challenges in manufacturing. Based on indices provided by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia and others, growth continued overall, and it was primarily in the services sector of the economy. That also was where the employment growth occurred as well. And in fact, the employment growth was quite robust in the three largest MSAs, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, in the last year. And in fact, given that Cleveland has lagged during much of this expansion, I think it's particularly noteworthy that the economy in the northern part, that part of the state, had picked up. And as strong as Columbus has been, we are very proud that Columbus has been a leader in the state of Ohio. This year, Cincinnati took first place. They beat us in terms of employment growth, which was, on a year-over-year basis in November, higher than the national average. So again, the services sector and regional type, the different regions picking up in growth, offset some of the weakness that did occur in manufacturing. And it was a difficult year for manufacturing. Jobs were lost there. Certainly manufacturing encountered a number of headwinds. The weakness in the international economy put downward pressure on exports, put downward pressure on various commodity prices. Also, the auto strike in general was a factor in the slowdown in manufacturing in the second half of the year. That strike only ended in late October, so a lot of the data that's coming out is still impacted by that strike. And of course, the civilian aircraft problems, the issues are having lingering type impacts on manufacturing, and that's a little bit more broadly felt across the country. When the transportation aspects of manufacturing are taken out, there actually was growth in manufacturing in the most recent statistics coming out of Washington. And that also includes the capital goods area, which was an area that was a little bit softer this year than it's been. Overall, looking at the Midwest economy, the Midwest, and that I primarily the eastern Midwestern states, that would be Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin. Those states grew faster than the national average during the economic expansion. That goes back to June 2009. That was maintained. That advantage in growth since the recession was maintained in the last year. And it was maintained in Ohio as well. Going a little bit to the east of us, Pennsylvania grew a bit slower than the national average during that same period as a form of comparison. So Ohio has done quite well in that area. And the overall unemployment rate in Ohio is ticked up a little bit, but it's still in that 4.0 to 4.2% range. And that is the lowest for the state since June to July of 2001. So the state is enjoying a nearly two-decade low in its unemployment rate. And I think that that's certainly a notable accomplishment. In general, the job opening rate, talk a little bit about jobs and the need of companies, the job opening rate in the wider Midwest is tied with the South for the highest in the nation. So we have more jobs in the eastern states and the western states. And I think that is another important point going forward. Housing markets in Ohio have been above the national average in 2019, as reflected by the FHFA House Price Index, which at least through the third quarter grew at about 4.9% versus 4.6% for the nation. And consumer confidence in our region, part of the Midwest, is really at a very high level. It's the highest since 2001, and currently it is higher than the national average. So despite the challenges, which are there, the overall economy is doing quite nicely. And a lot of that is because there has been a transformation in the last 20 years. The economy is becoming more and more service-oriented, and that's across the board in these states. So Michigan, as well, is doing an excellent job as far as that goes, as well as Illinois. So service-oriented jobs, and the large MSAs in Ohio in particular in the last year had done an outstanding job, above average job for many of the areas in the Midwest. Certainly the unemployment rates, it's not unusual now to see 3% unemployment rates. The 3.7 in Columbus, seasonally adjusted, 3.8 in Cincinnati, 4.1 in Cleveland is quite good again. So lower than the overall state average. So again, there's a bit of a dichotomy that the smaller MSAs are not doing quite as well as the three largest MSAs. In terms of going forward, we'll probably talk about this. Certainly, a lot of the trade policy uncertainty, which was, I think, a factor weighing on business confidence in 2019.
That's my next question, George.
Yeah, that should be going down, given the USMCA and also the phase one of the China trade deal. Also, the Federal Reserve, which was tightening monetary policy in 2018, probably a bit too much, has actually been easing monetary policy last year, and we're likely to feel the positive effects from that in the coming year, a positive stimulus from monetary policy. So again, some positive areas coming forth in the next year that should keep the economic expansion going, both nationally and here, and probably give some lift to manufacturing as well.
Yeah, so we have in prior forums, Bill and George talked about President's trade policies and tariffs, and we have seen some of the stories about individual companies that have been hurt by some of the tariff policies. Also, too, farmers have been hurt a lot by what's been going on with trade with China. As George was talking about, we do have the new trade deal with the Canadians and the Mexicans, and we have this, at least this partial deal with the Chinese. If you guys could elaborate, and George, a little bit more on what it is, what do those deals mean for our economy in Ohio and nationally?
I think it reduces the uncertainty. During the year, it wasn't clear whether tariffs would be implemented even on automobiles going across the borders, which is a huge, obviously, product of our region. The USMCA actually will integrate Mexico and the United States, Canada even more, and make it easier to do business across the borders further. So an improvement over on NAFTA. It's also a fairly long-lasting agreement, so that again should create an environment that's stable and one that firms are able to more easily invest in, minimizing the risk that something would change in the future. So that all of those are positive. The China phase one is obviously a part of a longer process to establish a better long-term relationship with China. There are 7 structural areas that the United States wants improved with China, such as intellectual property protection. And so as long as we keep moving on a path towards a trade agreement that incorporates these structural reforms, that should be better for the Midwest, for the United States, and really for the world economy, as well as China.
I've run into several studies that have argued that we got hurt a lot more in the tariff war than China did. And that's primarily because of the goods that China was importing from us versus the goods that they were exporting to us. They were importing primarily commodities, soybeans, for example. And Ohio farmers got absolutely clobbered by the tariffs. On the other hand, their exports to us were much less easily substitutable. They were things like laptops and appliances and smartphones. And so we wound up having to pick up the cost of those tariffs. On the other hand, the Chinese avoided the tariffs by substituting, say, South American soybeans for U.S. soybeans. And my worry has always been that that once those new supply chains were established, they wouldn't go back to American soybeans. But I am assured that the quality of American soybeans is unparalleled. And so I'm a lot more optimistic than I was that we're actually going to get that market back in a large sense.
Bill, one thing about your forecast that we should remind everybody about today is some of the stats that you and George have referenced really are estimates at this point. We will know more in a few months from now. It's stuff that the kids in the newsroom frankly referred to as sketchy. So, Bill, how long will it take before we really know how well the economy did in 2019?
Well, sketchy is a very kind word. And that's a challenge that I've always had to face in putting together this forecast, that these estimates, especially for smaller sectors, can be way, way far off, although my sense is that the quality of the estimates now is better than it was 10 or 15 years ago, at least at the aggregate level, because these numbers come from a limited sample, and so they all have margins of error. The 2019 numbers are going to be corrected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in March using better information, but they still won't be final until March of 2021. I've got a little bit of more reliable information, and I use that to guess the corrections that might come out in March. And you see that in the forecast that you have in front of you, in the blue numbers in that table. The blue numbers are not BLS numbers, they're mine. And if you're watching on TV, I'm going to have this forecast posted on my website, regionomicsllc.com, within the next few days. So we're going to get data for the full year from that more reliable source in September. We're going to have a very good idea then of how we really did in 2019, but the book won't absolutely be closed until a year from March. So tune back in.
So we are getting close to, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, George.
On data, that's the key, is to bring in data from many different sources, to compare them, to see if they support each other. And so it is a challenge, and some of the numbers can be revised quite a bit. But still, I think that's part of the work of economists, is to bring all that information together and come with fairly accurate forecasts.
So we're approaching the time for Q&A, and I want to cover one more topic before we get to your questions. And this topic is meant to be provocative. So I'll give you that disclaimer before I start. A lot has been made about our capitalist system and whether it's still a viable way of running our economy. I think most of us in this room would agree that capitalism and the rule of law have helped make the United States a wealthy country. But let's look at what's happened with younger generations of folks and what they've gone through. Maybe their mom and dad lost a job in the worst economic crisis to hit the U.S. since the Great Depression. Maybe they lost their home that they grew up in because it was foreclosed on. Maybe they're buried under a mountain of student debt and having struggles repaying it. They see wealth concentrated in fewer hands. Amazon, one of our wealthiest companies, and is getting billions of dollars in tax incentives and breaks. Even our company, that legislative action on House Bill 6 gives $1 billion to a single company based off of all your utility bills. And maybe to them, capitalism isn't working as well as what we have seen it in the past. Now, to the credit of some of the companies here today, we have seen them take steps. Fifth Third, one of our sponsors today, has raised its minimum wage to $18 an hour. George's company, Huntington, has started a program with Columbus State and Franklin that basically allows workers to go to college for free. But what else can we do when it comes to capitalism? I mean, are there things that we need to look at differently, or things that we need to change that can have, restore our faith or restore more faith in how we've done things in this country?
I think it really goes back to the drum that I keep beating, workforce development. And that's not just giving people education. It's also providing them with the wraparound services that they need to access that education. Things like child care and skills training, basic skills training, and transportation assistance. And transportation is a serious problem, and it is keeping people out of the economy. As we do that, people become more skilled, and as they become more skilled, their work is worth more and their wages go up. But there's still a substantial fraction of people who have to cobble 2 and 3 jobs together just in order to keep a roof over their head. And they're not getting ahead. If you earned more than 90% of all the workers in Central Ohio in 2018, you made $94,007. That is 2.2% more after inflation than you made in 2010. 4.5% more than you made in 2007. If you earned less than 90% of all workers, you made $20,000 in 2018. And that's 1.1% less after inflation than what you made in 2010. Nobody can keep a roof over their head making $20,000 a year. So, again, I think it boils down to workforce development. Higher wages benefit everybody, simply because people in lower income brackets spend a greater share of their earnings. And so that juices the economy.
George?
No, I actually agree with a lot of what Bill is saying with regards to workforce development. Although I do think that what could be done is even broader than some of the suggestions that Bill has made. I think it does go down to the community level, to the school level, to the family level, to the policy levels, to encourage all of it. There's a lot that needs to be done. Businesses need to do more in order to train workers, maybe involved in earlier stages, internships, other training programs. Actually, there are models abroad for it. Germany actually has a pretty good model for doing that. Maybe helping individuals get into the system in various ways. That would certainly help them thrive in the capitalist economy, which still is the best functioning in the world. We just saw not too long ago the communist countries coming over to the free enterprise system, and generally they love it, even those there who did well under the previous systems. So again, I think that I do agree with Bill, and I think there's a lot that could be done. And this is probably an area of discussion that probably could go on as well.
Channeling Churchill, capitalism is the worst economic system except for all the others.
Yeah. So with that, it's time for the questions to begin. I am going to save the speech about all the rules, blah, 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 blah. State your name and ask your question, that kind of thing. Also, too, I'm told that so the microphone is over there. People can queue up. We also, I'm told, the CMC now taking questions online, and I already have a few. So, Bill, first one for you. This is from Chris Cloth. I hope I say that name the right way. How does the blue chip economic forecast help us to understand the economic forecast for people in Central Ohio who are struggling to make ends meet every day?
Well, again, I think it's helpful in a sense to know that to know whether we're growing or contracting, what areas of the economy are growing or contracting. The problem with this forecast, and the problem with most forecasts, is that it's an industry forecast. It's not an occupational forecast. Occupational forecasts are harder. I've thought about doing them, but really what we need is a forecast of how jobs will grow at lower skill levels, lower wage levels, and we don't really have that yet.
Okay, first question from the audience.
Yeah. Thank you, John Melkai with the BIA of Central Ohio. Thank you for being here today. Housing construction and housing starts have significantly underperformed job creation in Central Ohio over the last few years. In fact, this year we're on pace and we're waiting for our numbers to come in to build less homes than we did the year before. What are the long-term implications if we cannot build enough housing to accommodate the jobs that are coming to this region?
And I would take that question further because this was actually on my list of things I was going to ask these guys today. I hear a lot from your companies that they have trouble finding people, and I hear a lot from manufacturers that they have a lot of trouble finding people and that they don't have the skills necessary to fill the jobs that they have. What are the risks of this to our economy if we can't find the people to help our companies grow?
I would argue that that what you quoted, John, is really a result of the workforce problem, just as our slower growth in the rest of the economy is a result. However, we are having a house built as we speak, so we're helping you out. But That said, the longer-term impacts of not filling the demand for housing are that in-migration to Central Ohio is going to slow because housing will become less and less affordable. Household formation will decline, and with it, household spending will slow. And we were basically going to have even harder a time filling jobs in the future than the very slow population, working age population projections that we're seeing for Central Ohio now. So it is a big worry. It's something I've been worried about.
On the positive side, interest rates are coming down here a bit. Mortgage rates are coming down. And nationally, we're seeing housing starts pick up. There's been some double-digit growth in housing starts. So that's part of the equation. You get some better affordability to increase the building, and that is certainly an improvement. In general, housing affordability in the Midwest is much better than in the rest of the nation. So that should be an advantage in companies in trying to draw people here who are interested in settling down and buy a home. So maybe the word needs to get out that you can get quality here for a lesser price.
Yeah. Thank you.
Next question.
Wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about disruption. So from a talent perspective, it's how do people stay relevant? And then from an organization or company perspective, how do you stay on top of your game and adapt to the future? I think that Nadella from Microsoft's talked about looking for team members who have a learn-it-all mindset versus a know-it-all mindset. So how do we adapt?
I think that's a large part of the problem, or a large part of the solution to the problem. You have to get into the attitude that the way you do your job now and the skills that you need to do your job now are different from what you're going to need in 4 or 5 or 6 years. It really is a question of learn and advance or die. You have to, as an individual, no matter what your career is, and again, knowledge work applies across the economy, you have to be in charge of your career, advancing it, understanding what's going to be needed. At the community and corporate level, what's needed is a clear sense of where the economy is going. There's a study being done right now looking at how we transition people from their current skills to these new skills. And so the community has a role to play. Companies have a role to play.
Yeah, I think that my concern is that there's still quite a bit of structural unemployment out there just because people don't have basic skills, basic mathematic and writing skills, and that is just really unacceptable. Because as soon as that happens to a person, they don't have any opportunities to learn in the future at all, and really have no chances. So I think a lot more has to be emphasized on bringing up basic skills from fundamental levels. And the more people that achieve that, they're going to be on their track on their own in terms of educationally learning, pursuing areas that they're interested in. One example is there's been a de-emphasis, for example, in shop and hands-on kinds of trades, and yet there's a lot of jobs in that area. Yeah. So if there were some basic opportunities or more basic opportunities for students to learn skills at those levels, they may decide that they can do quite well without even going to college, but going into an apprenticeship. But they need that basic education. They need that basic and that introduction to different jobs at an early stage.
135,000 people in the Columbus metro area between 25 and 59 are not working or looking for work.
Next question.
My name is Lisa Craig Morton. I own Victorian Village Guest House, and I'm going to piggyback on the previous question about disruption and ask, what is the impact to and the risk to our economy of disruption that is created by things like self-inflicted policy decisions of our government or climate change causing wide variations? I mean, like our farmers have had a double hit this year from extreme variability of climate as well as policy decisions on trade. So what is the disruption like that causing our economy to do, or what risk does that pose to us?
You want to take that, George? I got it too.
The environment is certainly an important goal and an important objective. It certainly is important for all of us in the long term, and to the extent that there are policies that help us deal with that in future, they certainly should be considered strongly. The only thing that I come from as an economist is that there are trade-offs, and there are also other social objectives, employment, a need for economic growth, talking about bringing up people from low income levels. So I think all of these objectives had to be taken into account together, and those trade-offs looked at closely and decided politically and socially.
And I would add that quality of life and the potential harm to quality of life that climate change is imposing and will continue to impose to a larger and larger extent is a very important thing to keep in mind.
Next question.
Hi, Jim Fry with Jim Fry Advisors. My question goes to you, George. Your response to John's question was that the Midwest is improving. However, if we look at it, Central Ohio is 54,000 housing shorts, and all the things that One Columbus is doing in terms of creating jobs, but we're way behind on housing, and that impact on providing people that you say we're short of. How do we address that?
Okay. Well, part of it, quite frankly, is that we need to build more dense housing units. If we grow in our density, that reduces the cost of public services. It reduces the cost of housing because you don't have these large suburban lots. And it allows us to accommodate the population growth that Insight 2050 and other folks are predicting. We're going from, according to that prediction, we're going from 2 million in the metro now to 3 million by 2050. And if we keep developing the way we've developed, we're not all going to fit. And so density is important, and fortunately, the demographic changes that we see coming down the pike are going to favor that kind of development. And so that and the fact that local jurisdictions who have control over zoning need to keep this kind of idea in mind. We cannot keep developing the way that we have developed. It's going to result in lower property values as the demand for those large suburban lots declines in the future.
Columbus gets it in terms of density, all of our suburbs have a propensity against density, as density being a bad word. And that's going to truly affect where we are in the future.
Couldn't have said it
Okay,
better
so
myself.
I think we have time for one more quick question. This is from David Harvey online. Are there trends in certain industries in Columbus that could be, or there's certain industries in Columbus where you might see early warning signs of a recession?
Not particularly. Again, I think there are some minus signs on my forecast. But again, I think that's driven more by the problems with workforce than it's driven by the underlying economics of the Central Ohio economy.
Yeah, and keep it in mind, we never know when a recession's coming. We only know after it's been here.
Yeah, they blow up fairly quickly a lot of the time, and so who knows?
Okay, I'll turn over to Steve for closing arguments.
Great. I hope you found today's forum enlightening. It's interesting to me. I'm going to echo Mark's comments that 400 of us come around to talk about economics. We sure know how to have a good time here, don't we? So let's thank our sponsors, BDO, Fifth Third Bank, Dispatch Media Group, and Excel Project Management, and our speakers, Dr. Bill LaFayette, Dr. George Mokrzan, and Mark Williams. And special thanks to all of you. We look forward to seeing you next week at CMC. Thanks.